It was the kind of place that time forgot. Hidden deep in the wilderness, miles away from the closest town, was an abandoned village known as Willow Creek. Legend had it that no one had lived there for nearly a century, and those who dared to visit often spoke of a strange silence that clung to the air like a thick fog. The few who returned told chilling tales of eerie whispers and shadows that moved without bodies. When Sarah and her group of friends heard about Willow Creek, it seemed like the perfect adventure. They were thrill seekers, after all, with a love for the unknown and an appetite for the supernatural. The plan was simple: spend one night in the abandoned village, document the experience, and leave with stories that would make them legends among their circle. As they approached Willow Creek, the forest around them grew denser, the sunlight struggling to break through the twisted branches. The deeper they went, the more the world outside seemed to fade away. The road was rough, and their SUV bounced and jolted as it struggled to navigate the uneven terrain. The GPS had stopped working hours ago, leaving them to rely on the old, hand-drawn map they had found on some obscure forum. By the time they arrived, the sun was already dipping below the horizon, casting long, ominous shadows across the village. The houses were small and decayed, with roofs caved in and windows broken, as if the very bones of the buildings were crumbling under the weight of time. A chill ran through Sarah as she stepped out of the car, but she quickly brushed it off. She wasn't about to let a little fear ruin their adventure. "Well, this is it," she said, trying to sound enthusiastic. The others, Mark, Lisa, and Jason, climbed out of the car, each with a mixture of excitement and trepidation on their faces. Mark, the skeptic of the group, was the first to speak. "Looks like just another ghost town to me," he said, kicking at a loose stone on the ground. "I bet all we'll find here are a bunch of rats." "Don't be so sure," Jason replied, his eyes scanning the village. "Places like this always have a story. And sometimes stories are true." Lisa, ever the optimist, smiled. "Let's just get settled and start exploring. Who knows what we'll find." With that, they grabbed their gear and headed toward the largest building at the center of the village, a decrepit inn that had clearly seen better days. Its wooden sign, barely hanging on by a single rusted chain, swayed in the wind, the faded letters spelling out the Whispering Pines Inn. The door creaked loudly as they pushed it open, and the smell of mildew and rot greeted them. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and every step they took stirred up clouds of it. They set up their equipment quickly, eager to begin their investigation before the night truly fell. But from the moment they entered the inn, something felt off. The air seemed colder inside, heavier, as if it were pressing down on them. And then there were the whispers, soft at first, almost imperceptible, but growing louder as the minutes passed. "Did you guys hear that?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark laughed. "It's just the wind. These old buildings always make weird noises." But Jason shook his head. "No, that wasn't the wind. It sounded like voices." Lisa shivered. "Let's just get this over with, okay?" As the night wore on, the whispers became more distinct. Words they couldn't quite make out echoed through the halls, and shadows seemed to move in the corners of their vision, vanishing the moment they tried to focus on them. Sarah's heart raced, but she tried to stay calm. This was what they had come for, after all. They split into pairs, exploring the various rooms of the inn. Sarah and Jason took the upper floor, while Mark and Lisa stayed below. It wasn't long before things started to go wrong. Upstairs, Sarah and Jason found what looked like an old diary, its pages yellowed and brittle. The handwriting was nearly illegible, but they could make out a few words: "The darkness consumes, never leave." As they read, a loud bang echoed through the inn, followed by a blood-curdling scream. Sarah and Jason rushed downstairs to find Mark and Lisa standing in the middle of the main hall, their faces pale. "What happened?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Mark started, but his voice broke off as another whisper cut through the air, louder this time, as if it were coming from right behind them. "Leave now, or stay forever, double quotes." The group froze, their eyes wide with terror. This wasn't their imagination. Something was in the inn with them. "I think we should go," Lisa whispered, her voice shaking. But when they tried to leave, they found the door wouldn't budge. No matter how hard they pulled, it remained firmly shut, as if something or someone was keeping them inside. The whispers grew louder, filling the air with an oppressive, suffocating presence. The group huddled together in the main hall, their nerves fraying as they tried to come up with a plan. But every idea they had was met with the same result: failure. The windows were sealed, the walls seemed to close in on them, and the inn itself felt like a living entity, watching their every move. As the hours passed, their fear turned to desperation. Mark, always the skeptic, began pacing the room, muttering to himself, "This isn't real. It can't be real." But it was real, too real. Jason was the first to crack. He ran to the door, pounding on it with his fists, screaming for help. But the only response was the whispers now louder than ever. Stay, stay with us, His screams turned into sobs as he collapsed on the floor, defeated. Sarah tried to comfort him, but there was little she could do. They were trapped, and whatever was in the inn wasn't going to let them leave. As the night dragged on, the group began to unravel. Lisa started talking to herself, her eyes wide with fear, while Mark became more and more erratic, lashing out at anyone who tried to calm him. Sarah, the leader of the group, struggled to keep it together, but even she could feel the madness creeping in. It wasn't until they found the hidden room in the basement that they realized the true horror of Willow Creek. The room was small, barely big enough to stand in, and filled with strange, archaic symbols carved into the walls. In the center of the room was a large wooden table, and on it lay an old, leather-bound book. The pages were filled with strange, incomprehensible writing, and as they flipped through it, they realized that the book was a journal, a record of the dark rituals that had been performed in the inn. The final entry sent chills down Sarah's spine. The ritual is complete. We are bound to this place, forever cursed to walk its halls. None shall leave, for the darkness has claimed us all. To those who enter, beware, for you too shall join us in eternity. As they read the last words, the whispers returned, louder than ever. The air in the room grew thick with the smell of decay, and the shadows on the walls seemed to twist and writhe, forming grotesque shapes that reached out toward them. They had to get out, now, but it was too late. One by one, they fell. Jason was the first. The shadows consumed him, pulling him into the darkness, his screams echoing through the halls until they were abruptly cut off. Lisa followed soon after, her mind broken by the whispers, until she simply vanished, leaving nothing but a cold, empty space where she had stood. Mark, ever the skeptic, tried to fight back, but there was no escaping the curse of Willow Creek. He, too, was taken, his body crumpling to the floor as the life drained from his eyes. Sarah was the last. She could feel the darkness closing in around her, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. But as the shadows reached out for her, she realized the terrible truth. They had never been alone. The inn was alive, hungry, waiting for new souls to claim. And they had walked right into its trap. As the darkness consumed her, Sarah's final thought was a simple one. We should have never come here. And then there was only silence. The silence that followed Sarah's final thought was suffocating. Willow Creek had claimed them all, just as it had claimed countless others before them. The village and its cursed inn stood as a monument to the forgotten, a trap set for those foolish enough to seek thrills in the darkness. But the story didn't end there. Weeks passed before anyone noticed the group's disappearance. Their families, used to their adventurous spirits, had initially assumed they were off on another spontaneous escapade. But as days turned into weeks, the gnawing concern grew. Calls went unanswered, messages remained unread. Eventually, the police got involved, but they found no trace of Sarah, Mark, Jason, or Lisa. Their last known destination, Willow Creek. The search team that arrived in Willow Creek was small, consisting of a few local officers and volunteers. They were hardened to the strange and the eerie, at least that's what they told themselves. Rumors of the cursed village had circulated for decades, but no one had ever bothered to investigate seriously. Most dismissed it as urban legend. But now, with missing young adults, the local authorities had no choice but to confront the forgotten village. When they entered the abandoned village, the atmosphere was oppressive. The buildings stood as if frozen in time, each one decayed and forgotten, much like the souls that had been claimed by the place. The officers exchanged uneasy glances as they approached the Whispering Pines Inn. Even in the daylight, the inn loomed like a dark specter, its shadow casting a long, unnatural stretch across the village. They stepped inside the inn cautiously, their footsteps echoing off the rotten wooden floorboards. Dust hung in the air like a thick veil, and the stench of mildew filled their lungs. Despite the harsh afternoon light outside, the interior of the inn was dim, as though the darkness within refused to let go. The lead officer, Detective Harris, called out, "Sarah, Jason, anyone?" His voice echoed through the hollow halls, but there was no reply, only silence, thick and heavy. As the team fanned out to search the building, they encountered the first signs of the group backpacks abandoned in the main hall, cameras and equipment strewn across the floor as though they had been dropped in a hurry. But there was no sign of the people who had carried them. Harris picked up one of the cameras, fumbling with the buttons until the screen flickered to life. The footage they saw chilled them to the bone. The camera showed Sarah and her friends laughing and joking as they explored the inn, unaware of the sinister forces lurking just beyond their sight. But as the video progressed, the tone shifted. Shadows moved in unnatural ways, and the whispers barely audible at first began to creep into the footage. The camera shook violently toward the end of the recording as Jason screamed, and the image cut to black. "That's not possible," one of the officers muttered, backing away from the screen. But before they could react further, the whispers began again. "Stay with us forever." The officers froze. The sound seemed to come from every direction, echoing through the empty halls. Detective Harris felt a cold sweat break out on his neck. He signaled for his team to retreat, but before they could move, the door to the inn slammed shut with a deafening bang. The temperature in the room dropped sharply. The officers drew their weapons instinctively, but deep down, they knew they were powerless against whatever was in this place. Harris stepped forward, his flashlight cutting through the thick darkness as the whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Stay, join us." Suddenly, the shadows in the corners of the room began to move, twisting and swirling like black smoke. They coalesced into shapes vague, humanoid forms with hollow, empty eyes that gleamed in the dim light. They watched the officers with a hunger that chilled them to their core. One of the volunteers screamed and bolted for the door, but as he reached for the handle, the shadows surged forward, enveloping him in a swirling vortex of darkness. His scream was cut off as he vanished into the void, leaving nothing behind. Panic set in. The remaining officers fired their weapons at the shadows, but the bullets passed through the figures harmlessly. The shadows continued their advance, pushing the officers back until they were huddled in the center of the room, trapped like prey surrounded by predators. "You'll join us." Harris felt something cold wrap around his ankle. He looked down to see a shadowy hand reaching up from the floor, its grip tightening with unnatural strength. He tried to shake it off, but it was no use. The darkness was pulling him in, dragging him toward the gaping void that had consumed their friend. Desperation clawed at his throat as he reached for his radio, screaming for backup, but all that came through the speaker was static. The last thing Detective Harris saw before the shadows swallowed him was the faint outline of Sarah's face in the darkness, her eyes hollow, and her mouth twisted into a silent scream. Days later, another search party was sent to Willow Creek. When they arrived, they found no trace of the previous team. The village was just as silent, just as abandoned as it had been for years. The police, unsure of what had transpired, quietly closed the case, labeling it as another unsolved disappearance. Officially, Willow Creek became just another ghost town, a place no one dared to visit. But the whispers never stopped, legends grew around Willow Creek, passed down through the generations. Some claimed that if you stood outside the village on a moonless night, you could hear the voices of those who had been taken. Their desperate pleas echoed through the trees, carried on the wind like a distant cry for help. "Don't come, don't join us." The few who dared approach the village spoke of the same strange silence, the same oppressive air that pressed down on them like a weight. And those who ventured too far into Willow Creek, those foolish enough to enter the Whispering Pines Inn, were never seen again. As time passed, the village faded into obscurity. People forgot about the missing groups, about the police officers who never returned. But Willow Creek remained, waiting patiently for its next visitors, because the village was hungry, and the inn never stopped whispering for more souls to claim. And when the night was darkest, and the wind blew just right, you could almost hear it faint, but unmistakable, "Stay forever." Years passed. Willow Creek and its tragic history faded from public consciousness, though whispers of the village's curse persisted in hushed tones. People who lived nearby still felt a strange unease when they passed the overgrown road leading into the village, but few believed the old stories anymore. It was just another local legend, a ghost story to scare kids around campfires. And yet, the shadow of the village stretched long, its mystery unresolved. One autumn evening, a small group of urban explorers, known for seeking out abandoned places and filming their adventures, stumbled across a forgotten forum post. It detailed the history of Willow Creek and the multiple disappearances associated with it. The group had a sizable following on social media and thrived on exploring eerie, decaying locations, especially those tied to ghost stories and unsolved mysteries. It was an opportunity they couldn't resist. "I'm telling you, this place is perfect," said the group's leader, Alex, as he slid his laptop around to show the others. The grainy image on the screen depicted an old map with Willow Creek scrawled in faded ink. "It's like an urban legend, but no one's been there in ages. If we get in and record the whole thing, we'll blow up online." "I don't know," Emily, the group's tech expert, replied hesitantly. "It's not just a legend. There are real cases of people disappearing. This might be a little more than we're ready for." Alex waved her concern away. "Come on, Em, you don't believe in ghost stories, do you? It's all just overhyped nonsense. We'll be in and out. A quick look around, maybe spend the night in the inn if we're feeling brave, and then we'll leave with footage that'll make us famous." Emily exchanged an uncertain glance with Ben, the group's cameraman, but they both knew Alex wouldn't be dissuaded. The group had chased thrills in abandoned mental hospitals, forgotten bunkers, and ghost towns before. This was just one more in a long list of creepy places to explore. So, despite her misgivings, Emily agreed to go. Ben, ever the adrenaline junkie, was excited. The last member of the team, Danny, was just along for the ride, more interested in the adventure than anything paranormal. The following weekend, they packed their gear: flashlights, night vision cameras, audio recorders, and even a drone for aerial shots, and set out for Willow Creek. As they neared the village, the road grew rougher, more choked with weeds and underbrush. GPS was useless out here, and Alex had to rely on the old map he'd printed. The closer they got, the quieter the world became. The wind died down, birds stopped singing, and even the sound of the car engine seemed muffled. By the time they arrived at the overgrown entrance to Willow Creek, an eerie stillness had settled over everything. "Well, this is it," Alex said, stepping out of the car and surveying the forgotten village. The fading daylight cast long shadows over the crumbling buildings, giving the place an unsettling atmosphere. "Doesn't look so bad," Ben commented, though his voice betrayed a nervous edge. The group began setting up their equipment, eager to start filming before the sun fully set. As they moved through the abandoned streets, Alex narrated for the camera, recounting the legend of Willow Creek. He talked about the disappearances, the cursed inn, and the rumors of ghostly whispers heard in the dead of night. "The Whispering Pines Inn," he said as they stood before the dilapidated structure. The inn's roof sagged, and its windows were shattered, but the front door still stood, slightly ajar, as if inviting them inside. Emily felt a chill run down her spine as she stared at the door. "Are we really doing this?" she asked quietly. "Of course," Alex replied, already pushing the door open with a dramatic flourish for the camera. "Let's see what secrets this place is hiding." The group stepped inside, and the atmosphere immediately shifted. The inn was far darker than it should have been, the shadows inside seeming to swallow what little light remained outside. Dust hung thick in the air, and the floor creaked ominously underfoot. "This is where the last group was seen, right?" Danny asked, scanning the room with his flashlight. "The ones who disappeared a few years back." "Yep," Alex answered. "Supposedly, they found their stuff, but no trace of them, and no one's been back here since." "Great," Emily muttered. She was already feeling uneasy, and the oppressive air inside the inn wasn't helping. They explored the first floor, filming everything. Alex was in his element, cracking jokes and acting fearless for the camera. But as they ventured deeper into the inn, the jokes stopped. The strange silence seemed to press in on them from all sides, and then the whispers started. It was faint at first, barely more than a murmur, but unmistakable. "Come or stay with us." Emily froze. "Did you hear that?" Ben nodded, his face pale. "Yeah, it's probably just the wind." "There's no wind," Danny pointed out, his voice tight. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, echoing through the darkened halls. "Join us forever." Alex tried to brush it off, but his bravado was faltering. "It's just the acoustics in this old place. Let's check upstairs." They ascended the rickety staircase, each step groaning under their weight. As they reached the second floor, the air grew colder. Their breath fogged in front of them, and the whispers intensified. Suddenly, the door at the end of the hallway slammed shut with a violent bang, causing everyone to jump. "What the hell was that?" Ben exclaimed, gripping his camera tightly. "Just the wind, right?" Emily said, her voice shaking. Alex hesitated, then moved toward the door. "Let's see what's behind it." As he reached for the doorknob, the whispers stopped. The silence was deafening. Alex pushed the door open slowly, revealing a small, empty room. But something was wrong. The air felt thick, almost like it was alive. And then, in the center of the room, they saw it. A figure, barely visible in the gloom, standing with its back to them. "What?" that Alex whispered, backing away. Before they could react, the figure turned. Its face was a hollow void, a featureless black mass that seemed to absorb the light around it. And then the whispers returned, louder, more insistent than ever. "You'll stay, forever," the figure lunged. Panic erupted as the group fled the room, scrambling down the stairs in a desperate attempt to escape. The shadows seemed to move around them, twisting and writhing like living things. The whispers followed them, growing louder, filling their heads with disorienting noise. They reached the front door, only to find it slammed shut, as though the inn itself refused to let them leave. Alex pounded on the door, but it wouldn't budge. "Open, open, damn it." Emily was shaking, her eyes wide with terror. "We have to get out of here. There has to be another way," Danny shouted, frantically searching the room. Ben, still holding his camera, turned to catch something moving in the shadows behind them. The figure was there, just a few feet away, its hollow face watching them with an eerie stillness. "Stay with us forever." In the chaos, everything became a twisted nightmare. The inn's walls seemed to close in, the shadows curling like smoke, blocking their path. Ben's camera shook in his hands as he tried to film the incomprehensible, the thing that defied explanation. The figure with the hollow face loomed ever closer, its whispers seeping into their minds, unraveling their thoughts. "We have to find another way out," Emily shouted, her voice cracking. She dashed towards the hallway leading deeper into the inn. Without thinking, Alex, Ben, and Danny followed, abandoning the front door that refused to open, hoping desperately for another exit. But the inn had other plans. As they sprinted down the corridor, the floor shifted beneath them. The wood groaned like something alive, the walls warping and stretching in impossible directions. Emily's flashlight flickered, casting brief, distorted images of the space around them, doors that led nowhere, windows that opened into pitch-black voids. This place is alive, Danny gasped, his eyes wide with disbelief. No, it can't be, Alex muttered, trying to keep a grip on reality. It's just an old building. We're imagining things, but none of them believed that anymore. The inn was a trap, and they were caught in its web. They rounded a corner, only to find themselves standing in front of the same staircase they had just descended minutes ago. Alex skidded to a halt, staring at the stairs in disbelief. This can't be real, he whispered. How did we? Emily's flashlight flickered again, and the figure reappeared at the top of the stairs, its hollow face turned toward them. The whispers grew deafening now, a relentless cacophony that seemed to come from all directions. There is no escape or stay with us. We have to go back, Ben shouted, turning to run the other way, but before he could take more than a few steps, the floor beneath him collapsed. With a scream, Ben plummeted into the darkness below, his camera slipping from his hand and clattering to the floor. Ben, Alex screamed, but his voice was lost in the noise, the oppressive whispers overwhelming everything. Keep moving, Emily urged, her voice tight with fear. They tore through the inn, its layout becoming more convoluted with each turn. Every door they opened led them back to the same corridor, the same staircase, the same horrifying figure with its featureless face. Panic overtook them completely. They had been running for what felt like hours, but there was no escape. The inn was playing with them, shifting, rearranging itself, trapping them in an endless loop of terror. Danny was the first to crack. I can't take this anymore, he shouted, shoving past Emily and Alex. There's got to be a way out. There has to be. Before anyone could stop him, Danny sprinted down another hallway and disappeared into the darkness. Danny, no, Alex shouted after him, but it was too late. The sound of Danny's footsteps echoed for a moment, then abruptly stopped. Silence, only the whispers remained. Emily and Alex were left alone, standing in the desolate hallway, the oppressive weight of the inn pressing down on them. The air felt thicker now, suffocating, and the temperature had dropped so low that their breath fogged in the air. We have to get out of here, Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. This place, it's not just haunted, it's something worse. It's alive, Alex nodded, but his mind was racing, struggling to comprehend what was happening. We can't just give up. As they stood there, trying to figure out their next move, a low, rumbling sound filled the air. The floor beneath them vibrated, and the walls seemed to ripple as if the inn itself was waking up. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, no longer just voices but something deeper, darker. Suddenly, without warning, the inn's front door burst open. Light flooded into the hallway, and for the briefest of moments Alex and Emily could see the outside world, their car, the trees, the road leading away from this nightmare. There, Alex shouted, grabbing Emily's hand. We can make it. They bolted toward the door, their hearts pounding in their chests. The exit was so close now, so impossibly close. But as they reached the threshold, something strange happened. The light faded, the front door was no longer there. Instead, they found themselves standing in the inn's grand dining room, the long, decrepit table stretching out before them. Candles flickered to life along the walls, casting an eerie glow over the room, illuminating the empty chairs arranged around the table. And then, they weren't empty anymore. Figures appeared in the chairs, ghostly, half-formed silhouettes, their hollow faces turned toward Alex and Emily. The whispers filled the room, rising to a deafening crescendo. Join us forever, Emily backed away, her breath coming in short, terrified gasps. We have to leave. We have to. But Alex wasn't listening. He was staring at one of the figures, his eyes wide with recognition. No, it can't be. The figure at the head of the table slowly turned toward him, and for the first time, Alex saw its face clearly. It was Danny. Or rather, it was what was left of Danny. His features were twisted, hollow, his eyes empty pits of darkness. He smiled, a grotesque, unnatural smile, and whispered, "Stay forever." Outside, the moon rose high over the abandoned village of Willow Creek, casting long shadows over the decaying buildings. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the faintest sound almost too quiet to hear of whispers. The explorer's car sat untouched at the edge of the village, waiting for its passengers to return. But they never would. Deep within the inn, the candles flickered out, plunging the dining room into darkness once more. The figures at the table sat in eerie stillness, their faces hollow, their whispers echoing through the empty halls. And somewhere, in the silence between the whispers, new voices began to join them. The village of Willow Creek would always welcome more. It always had room for one more.